Excuse me, but you seem to be confused. Economy boarding is at the rear entrance. The words sliced through the hushed murmurs of Pinnacle Airways' first-class cabin like a cold blade deliberately loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Victoria Winters stood with perfect posture, blonde hair pulled into a tight bun, her uniform pressed to military precision. She did not whisper her judgment. She announced it, one manicured hand resting on the headrest of seat 1C, the other extended toward the rear of the plane in dismissal. The woman at whom these words were directed, elegant in a charcoal pantsuit that spoke of quiet luxury rather than flashy labels, remained perfectly still. Only the slight tightening around her eyes betrayed any reaction at all. Alexandra Morgan held her boarding pass between two fingers, a simple leather briefcase in her other hand, neither extravagant nor cheap. Just appropriate, like her presence in first class. "I believe this is my seat," Alexandra said, her voice measured and clear, holding up the boarding pass. 2A. Victoria's eyes narrowed as she took the pass, examining it with the exaggerated scrutiny one might give a suspected counterfeit bill. Her crimson lips pursed slightly. This does say 2A. A pause deliberately elongated. That's unusual. This seat is typically reserved for our regular clientele. The implication hung in the air, as tangible as the scent of new leather and expensive cologne that permeated the first-class cabin of Flight 837 to Paris. It was 8:27 a.m. on a Tuesday morning at JFK International, and Pinnacle Airways' premier international flight was already running 15 minutes behind schedule. The first-class cabin, with its spacious pods and ambient lighting, was filling with its typical crowd, executives in tailored suits, celebrities hiding behind sunglasses, old money in cashmere. Victoria had worked this route for 7 years of her 22-year career. She prided herself on recognizing the regulars, on knowing who belonged and who did not. And in her mind, the woman standing before her, despite her composed demeanor and appropriate attire, simply did not belong. What Victoria could not possibly know was that in exactly 14 minutes, her entire career would crumble before everyone's eyes. Alexandra took her boarding pass back without comment and moved toward seat 2A. Victoria's voice followed her like an unwelcome shadow. "Let me see your ID as well, for verification purposes." Alexandra turned slowly. Several passengers were now openly watching the interaction, some with discomfort, others with the barely disguised interest of those witnessing potential drama. "Of course," Alexandra replied, producing her driver's license. "Though I do not recall you asking the gentleman in 1D for the same verification." Victoria's smile tightened as she took the ID. "Random security checks, standard procedure. Is it?" Alexandra's question was simple, her tone neutral, but her eyes held Victoria's with quiet intensity. Victoria examined the license, looking between the photo and Alexandra's face several times. Alexandra Morgan, age 42, New York address. Nothing that explained the subtle wrongness Victoria felt about her presence in first class. "Everything appears to be in order," Victoria finally conceded, returning the license, "though our system sometimes makes mistakes with seat assignments." "No mistake," Alexandra replied, tucking her ID away. "I selected this seat specifically 3 weeks ago." From seat 3C, Miguel Rodriguez watched the interaction with growing discomfort. As a travel journalist with over 1 million followers across his social platforms, he had witnessed his share of poor service. But there was something particularly unsettling about the way the flight attendant was treating the woman. He discreetly removed his phone from airplane mode and opened his streaming app. "Welcome to first class, Ms. Morgan," Victoria said with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Should you find yourself uncomfortable up here, just let me know. Economy has several open seats that might feel more familiar." A slight intake of breath from a nearby passenger was the only response to this statement. Alexandra simply nodded once and took her seat, placing her briefcase carefully under the seat in front of her. Victoria turned away, her attention immediately shifting to an older white woman boarding with a designer handbag. "Mrs. Whitfield, how lovely to see you again. Your usual mimosa before takeoff." Elizabeth Whitfield, a silver-haired woman with the confident bearing of old money, smiled broadly at Victoria. "You are an angel, Victoria. Yes, please." Miguel pressed record on his phone, angling it discreetly on his tray table. "Witnessing something deeply troubling on Pinnacle Airways right now," he narrated quietly. "Senior flight attendant openly discriminating against a first-class passenger based on... well, I think we all know based on what." In seat 4B, James Peterson shifted uncomfortably. The business executive had witnessed the exchange and recognized the subtle hostility for what it was. He had seen it before at board meetings at country clubs and executive lounges. The polite but unmistakable message, "You do not belong here." He considered saying something, then decided against it. Not his problem. He returned his attention to his financial reports. Victoria continued her warm greetings to the white passengers boarding first class, offering drinks, taking coats, providing newspapers. When she passed Alexandra's seat, her eyes slid past as if the seat were empty. Alexandra removed a tablet from her briefcase and began typing, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen. To a casual observer, she might have been preparing for a business meeting or reviewing a presentation. Only the tight set of her jaw suggested otherwise. The cabin continued to fill. The atmosphere of exclusive luxury persisted, but now with an undercurrent of tension that several passengers could feel but few could name. "Can I get you a pre-flight beverage?" Thomas Wright, a younger flight attendant with a genuine smile, approached Alexandra. "Water, please." "Still not sparkling," Alexandra replied with a small nod of appreciation. Victoria intercepted Thomas as he turned toward the galley. "I will handle 2A, she said quietly but firmly. "You take care of the passengers in row 5. Thomas hesitated. I said I will handle it." Victoria's tone left no room for discussion. Thomas retreated, casting an apologetic glance toward Alexandra that she did not see. She was focused on her tablet, where she was not writing business notes but documenting the incident in precise professional language. 8:32 a.m. Approached by senior FA name tag, Victoria Winters, and directed to economy, despite holding first-class boarding pass. 8:33 a.m. ID verification requested. Not requested of white male passenger in 1D or any other visible first-class passengers. 8:35 a.m. Offered more familiar seating in economy. 8:36 a.m. Service differences observed. White passengers offered pre-flight beverages and newspapers. My row intentionally skipped. Alexandra paused, then added a final line. This marks the third documented incident on Pinnacle Airways in the past 18 months. Previous complaints filed 5/12 and 11/23 received no substantial response. She then opened her messaging app and typed a brief text to Nicole Bailey, her chief of staff. "It is happening again. Prepare Protocol 16. The response came seconds later. Documented witnesses. Alexandra glanced at Miguel, who was still discreetly recording, and replied yes to both. Flight 837 to Paris. Will update when landed. Victoria returned with a plastic cup of water, not the glass tumblers she had provided to other first-class passengers, and placed it on Alexandra's tray table without a word or glance and moved on. She then turned to the passenger across the aisle. "Mr. Peterson, would you prefer champagne or orange juice this morning?" "Just water." "Thank you. Still working?" He gestured to his laptop. "Of course. I will bring you a bottle." "Sparkling or still?" "Still, please." Victoria moved to the next passenger, Elizabeth Whitfield. Mrs. Whitfield, we have that Chardonnay you enjoyed on your last flight to London. Perfect, Victoria. You always remember. As Victoria approached row 2, Thomas stepped forward. I can serve this row if you would like to prepare the meal carts. Victoria's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened. Thank you, Thomas, but I have a system. Perhaps you could check if anyone needs extra blankets. Thomas retreated, and Victoria continued her rounds. When she reached Alexandra, she did not offer drink options. Water. It was barely a question. White wine, please, Alexandra replied. Victoria paused. We usually reserve the premium wines for our frequent travelers. Alexandra looked up from her tablet. Is that Pinnacle Airways policy? Restricting beverage options based on frequent flyer status? The question hung in the air, direct but not confrontational. Several nearby passengers glanced over. Victoria's smile tightened. Of course not. I will bring you our house white. As Victoria moved away, Thomas approached Alexandra's seat. I apologize for the confusion, he said quietly. Would you prefer the Chardonnay or the Sauvignon Blanc? Both are excellent. Alexandra offered him a genuine smile. The Sauvignon Blanc would be lovely. Thank you. Victoria observed this interaction from the galley and beckoned Thomas over sharply. What are you doing? She hissed. My job, Thomas replied simply. Providing consistent service to all passengers. Listen to me. Victoria lowered her voice further. I have been flying this route for 7 years. I know our regulars, and I know when something is not right. The woman in 2A does not fit the profile. Keep an eye on her. Thomas frowned. What profile? You know exactly what I mean. She probably used points or got a corporate upgrade. Just follow my lead on this. Thomas hesitated, then nodded reluctantly and returned to his duties, his discomfort evident. Victoria prepared a tray with a plastic cup of the cheapest white wine available, not the glass stemware used for other passengers, and returned to Alexandra's seat. She placed the tray down with deliberate carelessness, causing a few drops to splash onto the tablet. Oops, Victoria said without sincerity. Turbulence. The air was perfectly smooth. Alexandra calmly wiped her tablet with a napkin. No harm done. She took a sip of the wine, made no comment on its quality or the plastic cup, and returned to her work. But her next note on the tablet was more detailed. 9:17 a.m. Drink service discriminatory. Other passengers offered choice of beverages in proper glassware. I received house white in plastic cup after being told premium wines reserved for frequent travelers. Junior F.A. Thomas attempted to correct situation. Senior F.A. Victoria deliberately spilled wine on my tablet, falsely citing turbulence. Alexandra opened her messaging app again, updating Nicole. Situation escalating. Documenting everything. Have identified one supportive crew member. Someone is live streaming the incident row 3 aisle seat. Miguel's viewer count had now passed 1,000. Comments were flooding in faster than anyone could read them. This is outrageous. What airline is this? Pinnacle. Airways, are you seeing this? Someone needs to report this flight attendant. Miguel narrated quietly. The differential treatment continues. The flight attendant is now deliberately providing lower quality service, different drink containers, and even accidentally spilling drinks. This is beyond unprofessional. It is discriminatory. Elizabeth Whitfield leaned across the aisle. Victoria is right to be cautious, she murmured to James Peterson. You never know who might have obtained access to first class through irregular means. Peterson shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Whitfield, with all due respect, the woman has the same right to be here as any of us if she purchased a ticket. Elizabeth's eyebrows rose. Well, I was simply observing that standards have changed. There was a time when one knew what to expect in first class. James returned to his laptop, a frown creasing his brow. He was not an activist or a crusader by any means. He generally minded his own business. But something about this situation was striking him as increasingly wrong. As the meal service began, the pattern continued. Other passengers received detailed descriptions of the menu options. Alexandra received her tray with a cursory chicken or pasta. "Chicken, please," Alexandra replied evenly. The meal was placed before her with none of the careful arrangement Victoria provided to other passengers. The silverware was haphazardly positioned, the bread roll cold. Alexandra ate methodically, her expression neutral, continuing to document each discrepancy on her tablet. What no one in the cabin realized, not Victoria, not the other passengers, not even Miguel with his live stream, was that Alexandra Morgan was not just any passenger documenting mistreatment. She was the CEO of Pinnacle Airways Group, the parent company that owned and operated the very aircraft they were flying in. And Protocol 16 was not just a documentation procedure. It was a disaster response protocol designed to address exactly this type of situation with immediate and irreversible consequences. 3 hours into the flight, the first-class cabin had settled into an uneasy rhythm. Most passengers were either working on laptops, watching movies on their screens, or napping under plush blankets. Victoria had maintained her pattern of attentive service to most passengers and barely concealed disdain for Alexandra. Thomas Wright had taken to quietly checking on Alexandra whenever Victoria was occupied elsewhere, offering water refills or extra napkins, small gestures of professional courtesy that nonetheless stood in stark contrast to Victoria's behavior. "Is there anything else I can get for you, Thomas?" asked softly as he refreshed Alexandra's water. "I am fine." "Thank you," Alexandra replied with a small smile. "Thomas is not it." "Yes, ma'am. How long have you been with Pinnacle?" "Almost 3 years total. 6 months on international routes." Alexandra nodded. "Do you enjoy it?" "Very much," Thomas answered genuinely. "At least I did until—" He trailed off, glancing toward the galley where Victoria was preparing another round of drinks for the front rows. "Until today," Alexandra finished for him. Thomas lowered his voice further. "This is not what we are trained to do. It is not what Pinnacle stands for. At least it is not supposed to be." And yet Alexandra gestured subtly to her tablet, which now contained detailed notes on over a dozen incidents since boarding. Thomas nodded, a hint of shame crossing his features. "I am sorry. You have nothing to apologize for, Thomas, but I appreciate the sentiment." Victoria emerged from the galley carrying a tray of fresh-baked cookies for the pre-landing snack. Her eyes narrowed when she saw Thomas conversing with Alexandra. "Thomas," she called sharply. "We need to prepare for the mid-flight service check." Thomas straightened. "Of course." "Excuse me," he said to Alexandra, then returned to the galley. Victoria distributed the cookies with her established pattern of discrimination. Warm chocolate chip cookies on porcelain plates with linen napkins for most passengers, a single cookie in a plastic wrapper for Alexandra. Cookie Victoria's tone made it sound like she was offering something distasteful. "No, thank you." Alexandra declined politely. Elizabeth Whitfield, watching from across the aisle, caught Victoria's eye and gave an approving nod. "Victoria," she called softly. "Might I have another cookie? They are delightful as always." "Of course, Mrs. Whitfield. I will bring you 2. Victoria's smile was genuine, her voice warm. Miguel Rodriguez, who had been live-streaming intermittently to conserve battery, turned his camera back on. For those just joining, the pattern of discriminatory service continues. We are now 3 hours into a flight to Paris, and the distinction between how different passengers are treated is impossible to ignore. His viewer count had stabilized around 3,000, but the comments had become increasingly outraged. At Pinnacle. Airways. Your employee is costing you customers in real time. This is why I stopped flying Pinnacle 2 years ago. Nothing has changed. Someone, Please tell me there will be consequences. In the galley, Victoria pulled Thomas aside. What exactly were you discussing with 2A? Thomas met her gaze steadily. Her name is Ms. Morgan, and we were having a normal customer service interaction. You need to understand something, Victoria said, her voice low and intense. I have been doing this a lot longer than you have. I know when someone does not belong and that woman does not belong in first class. She is probably using a stolen credit card or scammed upgrade, based on what evidence Thomas challenged. Victoria's eyes widened slightly, unused to being questioned by junior staff, based on 22 years of experience. Now I need you to focus on the passengers in rows 4 and 5. I will handle the rest. Thomas hesitated, then nodded stiffly and moved away, the conflict evident in his expression. Back in the main cabin, James Peterson had finally placed where he had seen Alexandra before. There had been a feature in Business Week about 6 months ago, women changing the airline industry. He could not remember the details, but he was increasingly certain she was an executive at some level. He considered saying something, then decided against it. If she was choosing not to identify herself, she probably had her reasons. Alexandra continued making notes on her tablet, her documentation now running several pages. Occasionally, she glanced at Miguel, who was still discreetly recording. Their eyes met briefly, and Alexandra gave him a slight knowing nod. Miguel understood immediately. She was aware of the live stream, and she approved. Ladies and gentlemen, we are expecting some light turbulence as we cross the Atlantic. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts when the sign illuminates. The captain's announcement was followed by the soft ding of the seatbelt sign. Passengers reluctantly returned from the lavatories and aisle conversations to their seats. Victoria moved efficiently through the cabin, checking that tray tables were secured and seatbelts fastened. When she reached Alexandra's row, she paused. Alexandra was working intently on her tablet, a spreadsheet of some kind visible on the screen. You need to stow that for turbulence, Victoria said curtly. Alexandra looked up. The captain mentioned the seatbelt sign would illuminate when necessary. It has not yet. I am instructing you to stow it now, Victoria insisted. Safety protocol. Alexandra glanced around the cabin where several other passengers were still using laptops and tablets. I see at least 5 other passengers still using electronic devices. They are experienced travelers who understand when to put things away quickly, Victoria countered. I see. Alexandra made no move to stow her tablet. When the seatbelt sign comes on, I will comply immediately. Victoria's face flushed slightly. She was unused to having her authority challenged, especially by passengers she had deemed unworthy of respect. She leaned closer, her voice dropping. Listen to me. I do not know how you got into this cabin, but I have been watching you. You do not belong here, and we both know it. So either follow instructions, or I will have the air marshal escort you back to economy where you belong. The threat hung in the air between them. Miguel, whose live stream was still active, had captured every word. His viewer count suddenly spiked to 5,000. Alexandra's expression remained composed, but something shifted in her eyes. A flicker of decision made a line crossed. She saved her document and carefully placed the tablet in the seat pocket. Thank you for your concern for safety, she said, her voice level. I have complied with your request, though I note that you have not made the same request of Mr. Peterson across the aisle, who is still using his laptop. Victoria straightened, adjusting her uniform jacket with a sharp tug. Different circumstances require different approaches. Indeed they do. Alexandra agreed with unexpected calm. Different circumstances such as different passengers. Victoria's nostrils flared. I do not know what you are implying, but... At that moment, the plane hit a pocket of turbulence. It was not severe, just enough to cause a slight bounce. Victoria, standing in the aisle without support, lost her balance slightly. She reached out to steady herself, and in doing so knocked over Alexandra's water glass. Water cascaded across the tray table and directly onto Alexandra's tablet in the seat pocket. Oh, Victoria exclaimed, not sounding particularly distressed. These turbulence bumps can be so unpredictable. Alexandra removed the tablet from the seat pocket. Water dripped from its surface. She pressed the power button, but the screen remained dark. "That is unfortunate," Victoria said without sympathy. "Perhaps you should have stowed it properly when instructed." Alexandra looked up, meeting Victoria's gaze directly. "That was not an accident, was it, Ms. Winters?" Victoria blinked, surprised at Alexandra's use of her name. "Excuse me. You have been targeting me since I boarded." Alexandra continued, her voice calm but carrying enough to be heard by nearby passengers. "Different service, different tone, different treatment. And now you have deliberately damaged my property." "That is absurd," Victoria scoffed. "It was turbulence. And how do you know my name?" "It is on your name tag," Alexandra replied simply. "And there was no significant turbulence. You intentionally knocked over that glass." Victoria's face hardened. "I have been nothing but professional. If you feel your treatment has been unsatisfactory, you are welcome to file a complaint upon landing." "Oh, I intend to do much more than that," Alexandra said, her voice still even, but now carrying an unmistakable weight of authority. Miguel's live stream exploded with comments. "She destroyed her property on purpose. This is getting insane. At Pinnacle. Airways, do something. Someone's getting fired today, and it is not the passenger." Elizabeth Whitfield leaned forward. "Victoria, do not let her speak to you that way. You have done nothing wrong." James Peterson closed his laptop, now fully engaged in the unfolding drama. "Actually, Mrs. Whitfield, I have been watching the situation develop for 3 hours, and the flight attendant's behavior has been completely unprofessional." Thomas appeared from the galley, having heard the commotion. "Is everything all right here?" Victoria turned on him. "Everything is fine. Return to your station." "No," Alexandra said firmly. "Everything is not fine. Thomas, would you be willing to confirm that Ms. Winters has provided substantially different service to me compared to other passengers in this cabin?" Thomas hesitated, caught between professional loyalty and basic honesty. "Thomas, do not answer that," Victoria ordered. "This is not the passenger's concern. Actually," Alexandra said, standing slowly, "it very much is my concern." The seatbelt sign dinged on. "You need to return to your seat," Victoria said triumphantly. "Captain's orders." Alexandra remained standing. "Thomas, please bring me the satellite phone. I need to make an urgent call. Those phones are for business class emergencies only," Victoria interjected. Alexandra's gaze never wavered. "This is indeed a business emergency." Thomas looked between them, then made his decision. "I will get the phone." "Thomas," Victoria hissed. "Do not you dare!" But Thomas was already moving toward the communication station. Victoria turned back to Alexandra, her professional mask slipping further. "Sit down. Now. Or I will have you removed from first class." "No," Alexandra said simply. "You will not." The satellite phone was a sleek handset that connected to Pinnacle's private communication network. Alexandra took it from Thomas with a nod of thanks and began dialing a number from memory. Victoria watched, seething. "Those calls cost hundreds of dollars a minute. You will be billed." Alexandra did not respond, waiting for the connection. After a moment she spoke. "Nicole." "It is Alexandra. Yes, I am still on the flight." She paused, listening. "Exactly as I documented. Yes, it is escalated. My tablet has now been deliberately damaged." Victoria's eyes widened slightly at the authoritative tone Alexandra had adopted, so different from the polite deference she had shown until now. "Initiate Protocol 16. Immediately." Alexandra continued. "Full documentation executive override and prepare communications team. I want Diana Foster on a video call in the cockpit in 10 minutes. Miguel, still recording, narrated quietly. Something significant is happening. The passenger is making some kind of executive call, and the flight attendant is looking increasingly concerned. Viewers had now surpassed 10,000, with Pinnacle Airways' social media team undoubtedly among them. Alexandra continued her call. Contact Richard in legal as well. Yes, I have witnesses and documentation. Also, check who is handling the Paris investor meeting. I will need it rescheduled. She paused. The tablet was intentional, Nicole. I am done observing. Victoria's face had drained of color. The name Diana Foster had registered head of in-flight services for Pinnacle Airways, the department head 6 levels above Victoria's position. Who are you? Victoria demanded as Alexandra ended the call. Alexandra handed the phone back to Thomas. I think we will all know the answer to that very soon. She turned to Thomas. Please inform the captain that I need to speak with him. Authorization code Apex 174 CEO. Thomas's eyes widened in sudden recognition. Yes, ma'am. Right away. As Thomas hurried toward the cockpit, Victoria grabbed his arm. What are you doing? You cannot disturb the captain mid-flight for a passenger complaint. Thomas gently but firmly removed her hand. This is not a passenger complaint, Victoria. This is much, much more serious. He continued to the cockpit, knocking on the secure door. Victoria turned back to Alexandra, confusion and the first flickers of genuine fear crossing her face. What authorization code? Who are you? Alexandra sat down calmly, refastening her seatbelt as the turbulence increased slightly. I suggest you prepare yourself, Ms. Winters. The next few minutes will be quite illuminating for everyone. Miguel zoomed his camera in, slightly capturing Victoria's increasingly panicked expression. His viewer count had now hit 15,000, and the hashtag #Pinnacle. Airways bias was trending nationally. Ladies and gentlemen, he narrated softly, I believe we are about to witness some form of corporate intervention. Stay tuned. Elizabeth Whitfield was now looking uncertain, glancing between Victoria and Alexandra with growing concern. James Peterson had a dawning look of recognition on his face, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally clicking into place. Thomas returned from the cockpit, his posture notably different, straighter, more deferential. He leaned down toward Alexandra. The captain sends his apologies and will be making an announcement momentarily. He is connecting with headquarters now. Thank you, Thomas, Alexandra replied. Victoria stepped forward. Thomas, what is happening? Who is she? Thomas met Victoria's gaze steadily. Someone who deserves a lot better than how you have been treating her. The cabin speakers crackled to life. This is your captain speaking. Would Senior Attendant Victoria Winters please report to the cockpit immediately? The announcement was brief, professional, but utterly unusual. In 22 years of flying, Victoria had never been summoned to the cockpit during a flight except during pre-planned crew rotations. The cabin fell silent. All eyes turned toward Victoria, who stood frozen in the aisle, her face a mask of confusion. Victoria Thomas prompted quietly. The captain is waiting. Victoria swallowed hard, straightened her uniform with trembling hands, and made her way forward. As she passed Alexandra's seat, she could not bring herself to make eye contact. Miguel narrated the moment the flight attendant has been summoned to the cockpit after the passenger made some kind of executive call. Something unprecedented is happening on this flight. His viewership had exploded to over 20,000. The comments section was moving so quickly now that individual messages were barely readable. OMG. Who is she? Someone important. Just dropped the hammer. Victoria is toast. Is that the Alexandra Morgan? As Victoria disappeared into the cockpit, a ripple of whispers spread through the first-class cabin. Passengers leaned across aisles, theories being exchanged in hushed tones. Elizabeth Whitfield turned to James Peterson. What on earth is happening? Surely they cannot be taking that woman's complaints seriously. Mid-flight? James studied Alexandra with new understanding. "Mrs. Whitfield, I believe that woman may be significantly more important than either of us realized." Alexandra remained in her seat, outwardly calm, though a certain tension in her shoulders suggested the strain of maintaining such composure. She checked her watch, then made a brief note on her phone, her tablet still inoperable from the water damage. Thomas approached her seat and leaned down. "Ms. Morgan, the captain, asks if you would like to address the situation yourself or if you prefer he make the announcement." Alexandra considered for a moment. "Tell Captain Bennett I appreciate the courtesy, but I believe this should come from the official chain of command. It will carry more weight with the crew." Thomas nodded. "Understood. Is there anything I can get for you in the meantime? A fresh glass of water would be appreciated." "In proper glassware this time," Alexandra replied with the ghost of a smile. "Of course." Thomas hurried away to fulfill the request. The minutes ticked by. 5. Then 10. The cockpit door remained closed, Victoria still inside. The tension in the cabin was palpable, passengers stealing glances at Alexandra with growing curiosity. Finally, after 12 minutes, the cockpit door opened. Victoria emerged, her face, ashen eyes red-rimmed. She avoided all eye contact as she made her way back through the cabin, disappearing into the rear galley without a word. Seconds later, the cabin speakers activated again. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Richard Bennett speaking. I need to address a situation that has developed during our flight today. It has been brought to my attention that a member of our crew has failed to uphold Pinnacle Airways standards of service and respect." The captain's voice was grave, formal, in a way that conveyed the seriousness of the situation. "Pinnacle Airways has a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior of any kind. We pride ourselves on providing equal, respectful service to all our passengers regardless of race, gender, religion, or background." A collective intake of breath swept through the cabin. This was unprecedented, a public acknowledgement of discrimination during an active flight. "I want to extend a personal apology to Ms. Alexandra Morgan, CEO of Pinnacle Airways Group, who has experienced unacceptable treatment on our flight today." The revelation landed like a thunderclap. Alexandra Morgan, CEO, Pinnacle Airways Group. Miguel's live stream exploded. His viewer count jumped to 30,000 in seconds. Elizabeth Whitfield's hand flew to her pearls, her face draining of color. James Peterson closed his eyes briefly, a grimace of second-hand embarrassment crossing his features. "Ms. Morgan was traveling as a regular passenger today," the captain continued, "as part of our ongoing commitment to experiencing our service exactly as our customers do. What she experienced falls well below our standards and will be addressed immediately and comprehensively." The captain paused, then added, "Senior Flight Attendant Victoria Winters has been relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight. Flight Attendant Thomas Wright will be serving as acting lead attendant. We appreciate your understanding as we work to ensure that the remainder of your journey meets the high standards you expect from Pinnacle Airways." The announcement ended. The cabin remained utterly silent for several long seconds. Then, from somewhere in the back, a single person began to applaud. Others joined in a slow building recognition of justice being served in real time. Alexandra did not react to the applause. She simply sat composed as ever as the reality of her identity spread through the cabin like wildfire. Miguel ended his live stream with a stunned final comment. "Ladies and gentlemen, we just witnessed the CEO of Pinnacle Airways being discriminated against by her own employee and then taking action in the most powerful way possible. This is going to change the company forever." His viewer count had reached 40,000. Victoria Winters stood rigid in the cockpit, hands clasped before her to hide their trembling. Captain Richard Bennett sat in the left seat, his expression grave. On the cockpit display screen, the stern face of Diana Foster, head of in-flight services for Pinnacle Airways, looked back at Victoria with barely contained fury. Do you understand the gravity of what has happened here? Diana asked, her voice icy through the video connection. Victoria swallowed hard. There has been a misunderstanding. I was simply... Stop. Diana cut her off. This is not a dialogue, Ms. Winters. This is me informing you of the consequences of your actions. Captain Bennett turned slightly in his seat. Victoria, do you know who is sitting in seat 2A? Victoria's mouth went dry. The passenger mentioned being a CEO, but anyone could claim that is Alexandra Morgan, CEO of Pinnacle Airways Group. Diana interrupted. Our boss. Your boss. Victoria's face drained of color. That is not possible. The CEO would not be traveling alone in regular first class. There would be an entourage security. Diana's expression hardened further. Ms. Morgan regularly travels as a normal passenger to experience our service authentically. It is part of a program she implemented called Protocol 16, a program designed specifically to identify the kind of treatment she received today. I did not know, Victoria whispered, her voice small. That is precisely the point, Captain Bennett said quietly. You should not need to know someone's title to treat them with basic dignity and respect. Diana continued, her voice sharp. Let me be absolutely clear about what has happened here. You have been documented providing discriminatory service to the chief executive officer of this company, a black woman who has faced this exact treatment her entire career and who implemented specific policies to prevent it at Pinnacle. I was not discriminating, Victoria protested weakly. I was following security protocols for suspicious. Stop lying, Diana snapped. We have received the live stream link. Half the internet is watching this unfold in real time. Your actions were blatant, deliberate, and exactly the kind of behavior Miss Morgan has been working to eliminate from this airline. Victoria's denial crumbled. She sank into the jump seat, her professional facade finally collapsing. What happens now? Effective immediately, you are relieved of duty for the remainder of this flight, Diana stated. You will remain in the crew rest area until landing with no passenger contact. Upon arrival in Paris, you will be met by Pinnacle representatives who will escort you to a different return flight. During that time, a formal review will be conducted. Am I fired? Victoria asked, her voice barely audible. Diana's expression was unyielding. That decision will be made after the review. But in 26 years at this airline, I have never seen a clearer case for immediate termination. Captain Bennett turned to face Victoria directly. I need to address the passengers. This incident will not be swept under the rug or handled quietly. Ms. Morgan has authorized me to identify her and explain the situation. Victoria's eyes widened in horror. You are going to announce this to the entire cabin? Yes, Diana confirmed. Pinnacle Airways does not hide discrimination. We expose it and address it openly. This is Ms. Morgan's direct policy. Victoria covered her face with her hands. 22 years of career building demolished in a single flight. Report to the crew rest area now. Captain Bennett instructed. Thomas Wright will take over your duties for the remainder of the flight. Victoria stood on shaky legs, her pride and certainty replaced by the cold reality of consequences. I did not mean to. You did mean to. Diana interrupted. Every action you took was deliberate. The only thing you did not mean to do was directed at the CEO. Now go to the crew rest area. We are done here. Victoria turned and left the cockpit without another word, her world collapsing around her. Diana's attention shifted to Captain Bennett. Richard, please make the announcement exactly as we discussed. Ms. Morgan has approved the wording. Understood. The captain nodded. And afterward, Diana said, her expression softening slightly. You give her the best damn service Pinnacle has to offer for the rest of this flight. Not because she is the CEO, but because that is what every passenger deserves. Victoria emerged from the cockpit looking like a ghost of herself. pale, shaken eyes downcast. She moved through the cabin without acknowledging anyone disappearing into the rear galley as the captain's announcement revealed Alexandra Morgan's true identity to the stunned passengers. As the applause faded, Thomas approached Alexandra's seat with a proper crystal water glass on a linen-lined tray. "Your water, Ms. Morgan," he said, his voice steady despite the extraordinary circumstances. "Is there anything else I can provide for you?" Alexandra offered him a small, genuine smile. "Just continue doing your job as you have been, Thomas. Professional, respectful, consistent." "Yes, ma'am." He placed the water carefully on her tray table. "I want you to know that most of us are not like Victoria. We genuinely believe in equal service for everyone." I know that Alexandra assured him. "That is why I am addressing this incident rather than dismissing the entire crew." As Thomas moved away to attend to other passengers, Elizabeth Whitfield shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Her earlier complicity with Victoria's behavior now weighed heavily in light of Alexandra's identity. She leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Morgan," she began hesitantly, "I feel I must apologize for my earlier comments. Had I known who you were—" Alexandra raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "That is exactly the problem, Mrs. Whitfield. The appropriate service should not depend on knowing who I am." Elizabeth flushed, unused to being addressed so directly. "Of course, I just meant I understand what you meant," Alexandra replied evenly. "And that mindset is precisely what needs to change at Pinnacle. Every passenger deserves respect, not just those with titles or wealth." Elizabeth withdrew, chastened in a way she had rarely experienced in her privileged life. Across the aisle, James Peterson unbuckled his seatbelt and approached Alexandra's seat, stopping at a respectful distance. "Ms. Morgan," he said quietly. "James Peterson, Westridge Capital. We met briefly at the Chicago Investment Summit last year." Alexandra nodded in recognition. "Mr. Peterson, I remember. I just wanted to say," he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, "I should have spoken up sooner about how you were being treated. I recognized the behavior was wrong, but I stayed silent. That was cowardly of me." Alexandra studied him for a moment. "It is easier to stay silent, is not it? To tell yourself it is not your problem." James nodded, accepting the implicit rebuke. "Yes, and that is part of the problem." "Indeed it is," Alexandra agreed. "But recognition is the first step toward change, Mr. Peterson." "Thank you for understanding," he said, then returned to his seat thoughtful and subdued. Miguel Rodriguez had ended his live stream to conserve battery, but approached Alexandra with professional respect. "Ms. Morgan Miguel Rodriguez, from Travel Authentica. I hope my live stream was not intrusive, but I felt the situation needed to be documented." "It was not intrusive," Mr. Rodriguez Alexandra assured him. "It was necessary. Sunshine is the best disinfectant." Miguel nodded. "My audience is asking if you would be willing to make a statement about what happened today." Alexandra considered this. "Not during the flight. This situation is still unfolding, and I need to focus on the operational aspects first. But I will address it publicly once we have landed." "Understood." Miguel returned to his seat immediately, typing notes on his phone, the story of a lifetime falling unexpectedly into his lap at 35,000 feet. The atmosphere in the cabin had transformed completely. Where before there had been the usual quiet hum of first-class travel punctuated by Victoria's targeted rudeness, now there was a charged awareness, as if everyone was participating in a historic moment. Thomas moved through the cabin with renewed purpose, providing attentive, equal service to all passengers. The other flight attendants, now aware of the situation, appeared briefly in first class with expressions ranging from mortification to grim determination. Alexandra returned to her phone, sending a detailed update to Nicole and the executive team. The next few hours would set the tone for how Pinnacle would address this incident both internally and publicly. There would be press statements to craft policy reviews, to conduct training programs, to overhaul. But for now, she simply sat back in her seat, accepting a fresh cup of coffee from a deeply apologetic flight attendant, and reflected on how a routine business trip had transformed into a watershed moment for her company. The plane continued its journey toward Paris, carrying within it not just passengers and crew, but a catalyzing incident that would change an entire corporate culture, all because one woman had been bold enough to fly as herself and brave enough to stand up when others would have remained seated and silent. The remaining hours of Flight 837 unfolded in a strange, charged atmosphere. Victoria remained sequestered in the crew rest area, her absence like a ghost haunting the cabin. Thomas had taken over lead attendant duties with quiet efficiency, ensuring that service continued despite the unprecedented circumstances. Alexandra had declined further conversation, focusing instead on work and communication with her team on the ground. Occasionally, she glanced up to find passengers quickly averting their eyes, the celebrity effect belatedly taking hold now that her identity was known. Elizabeth Whitfield, still processing her role in the debacle, had withdrawn into stiff silence, nursing a glass of wine and avoiding eye contact with everyone. When Thomas approached with a fresh round of drinks, she barely acknowledged him. "Everything all right, Mrs. Whitfield?" he asked professionally. "Fine," she replied tersely. Then, unable to contain herself, she added in a whisper, "This is all being blown out of proportion. Do not you think Victoria was simply maintaining standards? These diversity considerations are making everyone so sensitive." Thomas's expression cooled. Mrs. Whitfield, with respect, the CEO of our company, was treated poorly because of her race. That is not a diversity consideration. That is discrimination. Elizabeth stiffened. "Well, I never suggested." "Your drink, ma'am," Thomas said firmly, placing her wine down and moving on before she could continue. Unknown to Elizabeth, Alexandra had overheard every word of the exchange. She made a brief note on her phone, then returned to her work without comment. Miguel Rodriguez, having conserved enough battery, turned his camera back on for a brief update to his now massive audience. "For those just joining, the situation has stabilized," he narrated quietly. "The flight attendant who was discriminating against a black female passenger has been removed from duty after it was revealed that the passenger is Alexandra Morgan, CEO of Pinnacle Airways. We are about 2 hours from landing in Paris, where I expect there will be significant corporate response waiting." His follower count had surged past 100,000, with the video clips from earlier already being picked up by major news networks. The hashtag #Pinnacle Airways bias was trending globally, accompanied by a new one, #Alexandra Morgan CEO. James Peterson had spent the past hour researching Alexandra Morgan on his phone, reading everything he could find about the quiet powerhouse who had taken over Pinnacle Airways Group 3 years earlier. Harvard Business School. Youngest black female CEO of a major airline group, known for data-driven decision-making and cultural transformation initiatives. He looked across at her with new understanding. She was not just any executive. She was legendary in certain circles for her methodical approach to corporate culture change. And she had just experienced exactly the kind of treatment she had reportedly been working to eliminate. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our initial descent into Paris, Charles de Gaulle Airport. Local time is 9:45 p.m. Weather is clear. Temperature is 16 degrees Celsius." A pause. "Then I want to once again thank you for your understanding during today's unusual circumstances. Pinnacle Airways is committed to providing equal, respectful service to all passengers, and we deeply regret the failure to uphold that standard earlier in our journey." Alexandra closed her eyes, briefly appreciating the captain's straightforward acknowledgement. No corporate doublespeak, no vague references to service inconsistencies, just honest recognition of a failure and a commitment to do better. As the plane began its descent, Thomas approached Alexandra's seat one final time. "Ms. Morgan," he said quietly, "I just wanted to say personally, not as an employee, thank you for how you are handling this. It would have been easier to use your position immediately, but you chose to experience what regular passengers experience. That says a lot. Alexandra nodded. Thank you, Thomas. But I did not do it to test anyone. I did it because I should not have to announce my title to receive basic respect. I understand, he replied. And for what it is worth, most of us do too. Victoria does not represent all of us. I know that Alexandra assured him. That is why you will be hearing from HR about a potential new role after we land. Thomas's eyes widened slightly, but he maintained his professional demeanor. Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Is there anything else you need before landing? Just one thing, Alexandra said. When we land, there will likely be executives waiting. I would appreciate if you would escort Victoria off the aircraft separately away from media attention. Despite everything, public humiliation is not my goal. Thomas nodded, impressed by her consideration despite the circumstances. I will handle it personally. As the plane continued its descent toward the glittering lights of Paris, Alexandra prepared herself for what would come next. This was not just about one flight attendant or one incident. It was about a pervasive problem that had been allowed to fester too long. The wheels touched down at Charles de Gaulle with a gentle bump and squeal of tires. For most passengers, it was simply the end of a transatlantic flight. For Pinnacle Airways, it was the beginning of a corporate reckoning. While Flight 837 had been crossing the Atlantic, Nicole Bailey had been orchestrating a full-scale crisis response from Pinnacle's New York headquarters. The executive boardroom had transformed into a war room with leaders from HR, legal communications, and operations working in coordinated urgency. Alexandra's messages from the air had been clear and detailed, providing a minute-by-minute account of Victoria's behavior and the subsequent revelation of Alexandra's identity. Combined with Miguel Rodriguez's viral live stream, they had all the evidence needed to understand the severity of the situation. Carlos Mendoza, Pinnacle's Director of Customer Experience, had immediately begun analyzing the pattern of complaints against Victoria Winters. What had initially seemed like isolated incidents now formed a disturbing pattern when viewed collectively. 27 complaints in the past 18 months, he reported to the assembled team. All from passengers of color, primarily Black and Hispanic travelers, all dismissed as unsubstantiated by her direct supervisor. Robert Grant, the 59-year-old COO, ran a hand through his silver hair in frustration. How did we miss this? We have protocols specifically designed to catch these patterns, because her supervisor, Michael Donnelly, classified them as customer misunderstandings rather than service failures. Nicole explained, pulling up the relevant records. They never reached the threshold for pattern analysis because they were not categorized correctly. Deliberate? Robert asked sharply. We will find out, Nicole replied, her expression grim. Michael is being called in as we speak. The communications team was crafting statements for immediate release, coordinating with legal to ensure they struck the right balance between accountability and liability management. Social media is exploding, reported Tanya Weiss, head of corporate communications. The live stream has over 2 million views already. Every major news outlet is reaching out for comment. Robert turned to the large screen where Diana Foster was still connected by video. Diana, what is the status of the Paris response team? They are in position. Diana confirmed. HR representatives, corporate security, and media relations are at the terminal. We have arranged for Victoria to be escorted to a hotel for the night and flown back on a different carrier tomorrow? And Alexandra, Robert asked. Executive protection is standing by along with transportation to her hotel. We have scheduled an emergency European leadership meeting for 8 a.m. tomorrow at the Paris office. Nicole looked up from her tablet. Alexandra just sent an update. They have landed. She wants a full review of all crew complaints from the past 2 years, sorted by race and gender of both complainants and crew members. She wants the data tonight. Get the analytics team on it immediately, Robert ordered. I want those numbers before midnight New York time. As the team continued coordinating, Nicole's phone rang with a direct call from Alexandra. We are taxiing to the gate, Alexandra reported without preamble. I will make a brief statement to the press, but no detailed interviews tonight. I need the latest update on Victoria's employment history and any previous incidents. Nicole put the call on speaker. We are already pulling it together. 27 complaints, Alexandra, all from passengers of color. A brief silence. Then her supervisor, Michael Donnelly. He classified all of them as misunderstandings or customer errors. I want him suspended pending investigation. Alexandra said, her voice firm but controlled. Effective immediately. Robert leaned toward the phone. Already done, Alexandra. We are conducting a full review of the entire reporting chain. Good. Alexandra's voice was steady, focused. The internal message needs to be clear. This is not about one flight attendant. This is about a structural failure that allowed her behavior to continue unchecked. Understood. Nicole confirmed. What about Victoria herself? HR review first, following all proper procedures, Alexandra decided. But based on what I experienced today and the pattern you are uncovering, I do not see a path forward for her at Pinnacle. The plane came to a stop at the gate. Through the phone, they could hear the captain making the final announcements. I have to go, Alexandra said. Send everything to my hotel. We reconvene at the Paris office at 8 a.m. The call ended. In the New York boardroom, Robert turned to the assembled team. You heard her. This is not just about damage control. This is about fixing a broken system. I want every relevant data point, every policy failure, every opportunity for improvement identified by morning. The team dispersed with renewed purpose. What had begun as crisis management was evolving into something more profound, a catalyst for genuine transformation. As Flight 837 taxied to the gate, passengers began the usual routine of gathering belongings and preparing to deplane. But there was nothing usual about the atmosphere in the cabin. The normal impatience of arrival had been replaced by a charged anticipation. Thomas moved through the cabin with final instructions. Ladies and gentlemen, we will be deplaning shortly. As a courtesy to Ms. Morgan and in light of today's events, we ask that you please remain seated until she has exited the aircraft. There were nods of understanding throughout the cabin. Even Elizabeth Whitfield, chastened by her earlier exchanges, offered no objection. Alexandra remained seated, reviewing messages from her team while the plane completed its taxi. She appeared outwardly calm, but there was a focused intensity in her eyes, the look of a leader preparing for significant action. James Peterson leaned across the aisle. Ms. Morgan, I just wanted to say that I admire how you have handled this situation. It was educational to witness. Alexandra looked up. Mr. Peterson, may I ask you something? Of course. When you observed the discriminatory treatment earlier before you knew who I was, why did not you speak up? James shifted uncomfortably. I suppose I told myself it was not my place to intervene, and if I had not turned out to be the CEO, if I had just been any black woman being mistreated. The question hung in the air between them, direct but not accusatory. James considered it honestly. I would like to think I would have eventually said something, but I am not sure. And that realization does not make me proud. Alexandra nodded. Self-awareness is the beginning of change, Mr. Peterson, for individuals and for companies. I will remember that, he said quietly. In the cockpit, Captain Bennett was receiving final instructions from ground control and Pinnacle operations. Flight 837, you are cleared to gate E42. Be advised there is media presence in the terminal. Company representatives are standing by. Understood, ground, Bennett replied. Any special instructions VIP protocol for Ms. Morgan. Security team at the jet bridge. Separate extraction plan for crew member Winters. Bennett acknowledged and turned to his co-pilot. This is going to be a circus. At least we are on the right side of it, the co-pilot replied. I have flown with Victoria before. This was a long time coming. In the crew rest area, Victoria sat alone, still in her uniform, but with her wings pin removed a symbolic self-demotion before the official one could take place. She had spent the past hours cycling through denial anger, and finally a numb acceptance. 22 years. Gone in a single flight. Her phone had been buzzing continuously with messages from colleagues who had somehow already heard the news. The airline world was small, and gossip traveled faster than any aircraft. A soft knock on the door preceded Thomas's entrance. "We are at the gate," he said, his tone professionally neutral. "You will be deplaning after the passengers through the rear exit. There is a company representative waiting to escort you to accommodation for the night." Victoria nodded woodenly. "And tomorrow you will be briefed on next steps tonight," Thomas replied. "A different carrier has been arranged for your return flight." The message was clear. She would not be flying on a Pinnacle aircraft, not even as a passenger. Thomas, Victoria said as he turned to leave. "I did not mean to." She stopped, the platitude sounding hollow even to her own ears. Thomas paused. "You know what the hardest part of this is, Victoria? I looked up to you. I thought you represented the best of Pinnacle. Now I realize you represented exactly what we are trying to change." He left her with those words, closing the door quietly behind him. The aircraft shuddered slightly as it came to its final stop at the gate. The seatbelt sign dinged off one last time. The journey was over, but the consequences were just beginning. The jet bridge connected with a subtle bump against the aircraft door. Thomas prepared for deplaning while the other flight attendants took their positions. Alexandra remained seated, allowing her fellow passengers to gather their belongings. Elizabeth Whitfield hurriedly collected her things, avoiding eye contact with anyone. James Peterson moved more slowly, still processing the day's events. Miguel Rodriguez positioned himself strategically prepared to capture whatever might unfold next. When most passengers were ready, Thomas approached Alexandra's seat. "Ms. Morgan, we are ready when you are." Alexandra nodded, gathering her briefcase. The water-damaged tablet remained on her tray table, physical evidence of Victoria's actions. As she stood, the remaining passengers instinctively stepped back, creating a path to the exit. There was no applause, no dramatic gestures, just a respectful acknowledgement of her authority and the gravity of what had transpired. Alexandra moved toward the exit with measured steps, pausing briefly by Thomas. "Thank you for your professionalism today. Expect a call from HR tomorrow." "Thank you, Ms. Morgan," he replied with a nod. Captain Bennett was waiting at the aircraft door. "Ms. Morgan, I want to personally apologize for the experience you had on our flight today." "Not your fault," Richard Alexandra replied, having worked with the captain on previous occasions. "But I appreciate the sentiment. We will talk tomorrow at the office." As Alexandra emerged from the jet bridge into the terminal, the waiting contingent of Pinnacle executives was immediately visible, a group of solemn-faced men and women in business attire, standing apart from the small group of journalists who had somehow gotten wind of the situation. Robert Grant had flown to Paris earlier that day for unrelated business, and now stood at the front of the executive group. Next to him was Isabelle Laurent, head of European operations, her expression a mixture of mortification and resolve. Alexandra Robert stepped forward, extending his hand. "I am deeply sorry about what happened. Save it for the meeting, Robert." Alexandra replied, not unkindly, but firmly. "Right now I need to address this publicly, then get to the hotel and review the data Nicole is sending." She turned to face the small group of journalists. There were only 5 or 6, but their cameras and microphones represented global reach in the age of digital media. Miguel Rodriguez had already joined them, his earlier live stream having earned him immediate credibility with the press corps. Alexandra approached the journalists with the same calm determination she had maintained throughout the flight. No PR handler, no prepared statement cards, just direct engagement. "Ms. Morgan," several voices called at once. "Can you comment on what happened on Flight 837?" Alexandra raised a hand, and the questions immediately ceased the natural authority she carried, now amplified by the day's events. Today, while traveling as a regular passenger on Pinnacle Airways Flight 837, I experienced discriminatory treatment from a member of our cabin crew. She began, her voice clear and steady. I was singled out for different service, subjected to hostile comments, and eventually had my personal property damaged, all because I did not fit someone's image of what a first-class passenger should look like. She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to register. This is unacceptable. Not because it happened to me as CEO, but because it should not happen to anyone on any flight on any airline ever. The journalists scribbled notes furiously, cameras rolling. Pinnacle Airways has a clear policy against discrimination of any kind. Today we failed to live up to that policy. As CEO, I take full responsibility for that failure, not the individual incident, but the culture that allowed it to happen. A reporter called out, "Will the flight attendant be fired?" "Personnel matters follow specific protocols," Alexandra replied. "What I can tell you is that this incident has triggered a comprehensive review of our service practices, training protocols, and complaint procedures. This is not about one employee. This is about ensuring that Pinnacle's commitment to equality is reflected in every interaction at every level of our operation." Another question. Did you identify yourself as CEO during the flight? No. Alexandra answered. I travel regularly as a normal passenger, experiencing our service exactly as our customers do. That should not matter. Every passenger deserves respect regardless of title or position. What changes will Pinnacle be making in response to this incident? Alexandra's expression was resolute. Immediate ones. We will be announcing specific measures within 48 hours. But I can tell you now that they will include enhanced training, revised complaint procedures, and new accountability mechanisms for service disparities. She glanced at her watch. I will take one more question. Miguel Rodriguez stepped forward. Ms. Morgan, your decision to experience the flight as a regular passenger revealed a problem that might otherwise have remained hidden. Will this approach continue? Alexandra nodded appreciatively at the thoughtful question. Yes, Mr. Rodriguez. This is part of a program we call Protocol 16, where executives regularly travel as ordinary passengers. Today proved its value, though certainly not in the way any of us would have wished. She addressed the entire press group again. Thank you for your questions. We will be making a more detailed statement tomorrow. For now, I will simply say this. What happened today was a painful reminder of how far we still have to go, but it also strengthens my resolve to get us there. With that, she stepped back, rejoining Robert and the executive team. The journalists continued shouting questions, but Alexandra had said what needed to be said for now. The real work would happen away from the cameras. As the executive group moved toward the exit, a commotion at another gate caught their attention. Victoria Winters was being escorted through a side entrance by Pinnacle representatives, her head down, clearly trying to avoid notice. Alexandra paused, watching for a moment as the woman who had discriminated against her was ushered away. There was no satisfaction in her expression, only a certain resigned determination, the look of someone who recognized that the problem was much larger than one person's prejudice. "Let us go," she said to Robert. "We have work to do." 8:07 a.m. Pinnacle Airways, Paris office. The conference room was silent as Alexandra concluded her detailed account of the previous day's events. Around the large oval table sat Pinnacle's entire European leadership team, along with Robert Grant and key personnel who had flown in overnight from New York. Alexandra had spoken for nearly 30 minutes, describing not just Victoria's actions, but the broader implications for the company. She had been meticulous, unemotional, focused on facts rather than feelings, but the impact of her words was powerful nonetheless. So, that is what happened. She finished closing the portfolio containing her notes. Now let us discuss what we are going to do about it. Robert Grant spoke first. The HR review of Victoria Winters' record is complete. 27 complaints from passengers of color in 18 months, all buried by her supervisor, Michael Donnelly. We have also uncovered 6 internal complaints from crew members of color who reported hostile work environments when assigned to her flights. And Donnelly Alexandra asked. Suspended pending investigation, Robert confirmed. Initial interviews suggest he was actively protecting Victoria and several other senior flight attendants with similar complaint patterns. Isabelle Laurent, head of European operations, leaned forward. Alexandra. This is clearly a termination-level offense. Both Victoria and Michael. The evidence is overwhelming. Alexandra nodded slowly. I agree about Michael Donnelly. His actions represent a profound breach of our policies and values. But I want to be careful about Victoria. Surprised looks were exchanged around the table. Not because she does not deserve to be terminated, Alexandra clarified, but because I want to ensure we address the underlying issues, not just the symptoms. She stood moving to the whiteboard at the front of the room. Here is what we know. Victoria Winters did not develop these attitudes overnight, nor did she hide them effectively. She felt comfortable expressing them because she operated in an environment where such behavior was tolerated, even implicitly encouraged. Alexandra drew a diagram showing the hierarchy of in-flight services. Victoria reported to Michael Donnelly, who buried complaints. Michael reported to Regional Director James Hoffman, who never questioned why his region had fewer reported incidents of discrimination than others. James reported to Diana Foster, who trusted the data she received without verifying its collection methodology. She circled the entire diagram. This is not just about Victoria. This is about a failure of oversight, accountability, and culture. Carlos Mendoza, who had flown in from New York, nodded in agreement. We have run the numbers, Alexandra. When we properly categorize all passenger complaints from the past 3 years, we see clear patterns of differential treatment based on race, gender, and perceived socioeconomic status. It is not just Victoria. It is not just Michael's team. It is widespread. The room fell silent as the implication sank in. So what is the solution? Robert finally asked. We cannot fire everyone. No, Alexandra agreed. But we can change the system they operate in. She returned to her seat, opening a folder that had been placed at her position. I have drafted a comprehensive response plan. I want your input, but these core elements are non-negotiable. She distributed copies to everyone present. First, yes, Victoria Winters will be terminated. Her actions were deliberate, documented, and directly contrary to our stated values and policies. Michael Donnelly as well for actively suppressing complaints. Nods of agreement around the table. Second, we are implementing a new accountability structure for service complaints. Any complaint suggesting discriminatory treatment will be automatically escalated to regional VP level, bypassing immediate supervisors. And we are revising our metrics to specifically track service disparities across demographic groups. Robert studied the document. This is going to increase workload at the executive level significantly. Yes, it will. Alexandra agreed without apology. Until we have demonstrated that we can handle these issues appropriately at lower levels. Trust is earned, Robert. She continued. Third, we are expanding Protocol 16. Every executive from VP level up will be required to complete at least 4 anonymous flights per year, experiencing our service as regular passengers. And we are diversifying the executive team participating to ensure we are capturing a range of experiences. Fourth, complete retraining for all customer-facing staff with enhanced modules on unconscious bias and equitable service. This is not a one-time seminar. It is ongoing education with practical assessments. Isabel looked up from the document. This is ambitious, Alexandra. The cost implications alone are irrelevant compared to the cost of continuing as we are. Alexandra interrupted firmly. Yesterday I experienced what countless passengers have endured on our airline. The only difference is I can do something about it. She closed her folder with finality. Victoria Winters is not the disease. She is a symptom. We are treating both today. The meeting continued for 3 more hours, diving deep into implementation details, communication strategies, and metrics for measuring success. By the end, a clear path forward had emerged, one that acknowledged the severity of the immediate incident while addressing the deeper cultural issues it had exposed. As the meeting concluded, Alexandra remained behind with Robert, reviewing the final press statement they would release that afternoon. "This is going to change everything," Robert observed, studying the comprehensive plan they had developed. "It needs to." Alexandra replied simply, "Otherwise, we are just waiting for the next Victoria Winters." Robert nodded, understanding the truth in her words. "The board will want to talk about the financial implications." "Let them," Alexandra said, gathering her materials. "Some things matter more than quarterly results, if they do not understand that they have chosen the wrong CEO." The statement went out at 2 p.m. Paris time, 8 a.m. New York time. It was comprehensive, direct, and unequivocal. Pinnacle Airways was taking full responsibility for the failure, terminating the employees involved and implementing sweeping changes to prevent similar incidents in the future. Victoria Winters received official notice of her termination while waiting for her return flight to New York. After 22 years at Pinnacle Airways, her career ended not with the retirement celebration she had once envisioned, but with a hand-delivered letter in an airport hotel room. The letter was professional, detailed, and devoid of malice, much like the CEO whose experience had triggered its writing. But its message was clear. Some behaviors could not be trained away or overlooked. Some lines once crossed could not be uncrossed. As Victoria read the letter, tears finally came, not for the loss of her job, but for the realization of who she had allowed herself to become, one small compromise at a time, until discriminatory behavior had become so natural she displayed it to the CEO herself without hesitation or shame. It was perhaps the first honest moment of reflection in her career, and it had come exactly 22 years too late. The story exploded across traditional and social media platforms with unprecedented speed. Miguel Rodriguez's live stream had laid the groundwork, but the official confirmation from Pinnacle Airways transformed it from viral moment to global conversation. Pinnacle. Accountability replaced #Pinnacle. Airways. Bias as the dominant hashtag. Alexandra Morgan's name became a trending topic, her handling of the situation analyzed from every angle. Business schools immediately began drafting case studies. Diversity consultants cited the incident in presentations. Competing airlines launched urgent reviews of their own complaint procedures. 3 days after the flight, Alexandra Morgan held a formal press conference at Pinnacle's New York headquarters. The room was packed with journalists from around the world, cameras trained on the podium bearing the company's logo. Alexandra stepped to the microphone poised in a charcoal suit, her expression serious but determined. "Good morning. 3 days ago, while traveling as a regular passenger on Pinnacle Airways Flight 837, I experienced discriminatory treatment based on how I look. Today I want to address not just what happened, but what we are doing to ensure it does not happen again to anyone, anywhere in our operation." She outlined the immediate actions already taken: the termination of Victoria Winters and Michael Donnelly, the suspension of 3 additional supervisors pending investigation, the launch of a comprehensive service audit across all routes and crew teams. "But firing people is not enough," she continued. "Replacing individuals without addressing root causes simply creates space for new individuals to perpetuate old problems. That is why today I am announcing the Respect Initiative." Behind her, a large screen displayed the acronym "Recognizing Every Single Passenger Equally with Consistent Treatment." This is not a slogan or a temporary campaign, Alexandra emphasized. This is a fundamental restructuring of how we measure, monitor, and manage service quality at Pinnacle Airways. She detailed the core components of the initiative: Independent review of all passenger complaints from the past 5 years, recategorized according to new, more stringent standards. Expanded Protocol 16 program, with executives regularly experiencing service as ordinary passengers. New technology, allowing real-time service feedback from passengers with AI analysis to identify patterns of disparate treatment. Revised training for all customer-facing staff with practical assessments and ongoing education. Structural changes to how service complaints are escalated and addressed. Public quarterly reporting of service metrics broken down by passenger demographics. The press conference continued for nearly an hour with Alexandra answering questions directly and without corporate evasion. When asked if the changes were simply damage control, her response was characteristically straightforward. If Pinnacle wanted damage control, we would have issued a vague apology, fired one flight attendant, and moved on. What we are doing requires significantly more effort, investment, and commitment. This is not about protecting our image. It is about becoming the airline we have always claimed to be. As the press conference concluded, Thomas Wright watched from the back of the room. He had been flown to New York the previous day, uncertain why he had been summoned to headquarters. Now, as Alexandra stepped away from the podium, a member of the HR team approached him. "Mr. Wright, Ms. Morgan would like to speak with you privately." Thomas was escorted to a small conference room where Alexandra was reviewing notes with Nicole Bailey. She looked up as he entered, her expression warming slightly. "Thomas, thank you for coming all this way." "Of course, Ms. Morgan." He stood somewhat awkwardly, unsure of his role in the unfolding corporate drama. Alexandra gestured to a chair. "Please sit. I wanted to speak with you personally about what happens next." Thomas sat, his posture straight, professional. "I am happy to help however I can. Your actions on Flight 837 demonstrated exactly the values Pinnacle should represent." Alexandra began. "You attempted to provide equal service despite pressure from a senior colleague. You recognized inappropriate behavior and tried to correct it within your authority. That is remarkably difficult to do, especially as a junior team member." Thomas nodded his appreciation of the recognition. "I just tried to do the right thing, and that is exactly why I would like to offer you a new position." Alexandra continued. "We are creating a specialized team to implement the Respect Initiative across our entire operation. We need people who understand both the frontline realities and the importance of equitable treatment." Nicole slid a folder across the table. Thomas opened it to find a formal job offer, training specialist for the Respect Initiative with a substantial salary increase and relocation to New York. "We need people who do not just talk about values but demonstrate them when tested," Alexandra explained. "People exactly like you, Thomas." Thomas stared at the offer, momentarily speechless. I do not know what to say." "You do not have to decide immediately," Alexandra assured him. "Take some time to consider it, but I hope you will accept. We need voices like yours if we are going to create real change." After Thomas had departed, Nicole turned to Alexandra. "You know the cynics will say you are just elevating him because he was nice to the CEO." Alexandra smiled slightly. "Let them. We both know why he is being offered this role. He demonstrated integrity when it would have been easier not to. That is exactly the quality we need to lead this initiative." Meanwhile, across town, Victoria Winters sat in her apartment surrounded by the accumulated mementos of a 22-year career, now abruptly ended. Her phone had been ringing constantly, colleagues, friends, even a few journalists seeking exclusive interviews. She had answered none of them. The formal termination letter lay on her coffee table alongside printouts of news articles about the incident. Her face had been pixelated in most publications, a small mercy in the digital pillory she now endured. The doorbell rang. Victoria ignored it as she had ignored the previous attempts to contact her. But this time the visitor was persistent. After the third ring, Victoria reluctantly went to the door and checked the peephole. Elizabeth Whitfield stood in the hallway, impeccably dressed as always, her expression unreadable. Victoria hesitated, then opened the door. "Mrs. Whitfield, this is unexpected. May I come in?" Elizabeth asked, her usual authoritative tone somewhat subdued. Victoria stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Elizabeth surveyed the apartment, the half-packed boxes, the scattered papers, the general disarray of a life in transition. "I wanted to check on you," Elizabeth said finally. "This situation has been challenging for everyone involved." Victoria gave a hollow laugh. "Challenging? I have lost my career, my reputation, and my future prospects in a single day. Challenging does not begin to cover it." Elizabeth nodded, seating herself carefully on the edge of the sofa. "I know, and I feel somewhat responsible." "You?" Victoria frowned. "You did not do anything." "Precisely," Elizabeth replied. "I encouraged your behavior. I reinforced your assumptions. I was complicit in creating an environment where you felt your actions were acceptable." Victoria sank into a chair opposite her. "You are not responsible for my choices, Mrs. Whitfield." "Perhaps not directly," Elizabeth conceded. "But we create cultures together, Victoria, and I contributed to one that ultimately failed both of us." They sat in silence for a moment, two women confronting uncomfortable truths from opposite sides of the same incident. "What will you do now?" Elizabeth finally asked. Victoria shook her head. "I do not know. My entire adult life has been Pinnacle Airways. I do not know how to be anything else." Elizabeth studied her thoughtfully. "Perhaps this is an opportunity, then, to become something different, something better." The words hung between them, not quite forgiveness, not quite absolution, but a tentative acknowledgement that even the most profound failures could contain the seeds of transformation. As Elizabeth left a short time later, Victoria stood at her window watching the older woman's car pull away. For the first time since the incident, she felt something beyond the crushing weight of humiliation and loss. It was not hope, exactly, but it was perhaps the beginning of reflection. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but like all journeys, it began with a single step: the recognition that the path she had been on had led her terribly tragically astray. 1 month after Flight 837, Pinnacle Airways headquarters hummed with unprecedented activity. The Respect Initiative had moved from announcement to implementation with remarkable speed, driven by Alexandra Morgan's clear directive change, everything that needs changing as quickly as possible without compromise. The executive boardroom had been temporarily converted into the initiative's command center. Timeline charts covered the walls alongside data visualizations, tracking complaints, service metrics, and implementation milestones. Robert Grant stood before the assembled leadership team reviewing progress. Training program rollout is at 68% of customer-facing staff. Complaint review is complete for the past 3 years, ongoing for years 4 and 5. The service feedback app launches next week for beta testing on selected routes. Alexandra nodded, making notes on her tablet, a new one replacing the water-damaged device from Flight 837. "And the Protocol 16 expansion, fully implemented," Nicole reported. "Every executive, VP, and above has completed at least one anonymous flight. The results are illuminating." She displayed a chart showing service quality ratings from the executive flights broken down by race and gender of the executive travelers. The disparities were unmistakable. White male executives consistently reported excellent service, while executives of color, particularly women, reported noticeable differences in quality attention and respect. This confirms what we suspected Alexandra observed. The problem is not isolated to a few bad actors. It is baked into everyday interactions. Carlos Mendoza, now leading the technical implementation of the Respect Initiative, added, "The good news is, now we can measure it. The real-time feedback system is already identifying patterns we could not see before." Alexandra turned to Diana Foster, who had been unusually quiet throughout the meeting. Diana, update on the in-flight services restructuring. Diana straightened in her seat. The past month had been particularly challenging for her department, with the realization that discriminatory service had flourished under her ultimate authority. We have reorganized the entire complaint handling structure, she reported. Any complaint suggesting potential bias now goes directly to a specialized review team, bypassing the old chain of command entirely. And we have implemented blind reviews names and identifying details removed to reduce the influence of existing relationships. And Michael Donnelly's team, Alexandra, pressed. Complete overhaul, Diana confirmed. 3 additional supervisors terminated for similar patterns of complaint suppression. New leadership team in place with clear accountability metrics tied directly to equitable service outcomes. Alexandra nodded her approval. Good. Remember, we are not just fixing what broke on Flight 837, we are addressing the conditions that made it possible. The meeting continued with detailed updates from each department, followed by planning for the next implementation phase. Throughout, Alexandra maintained her characteristic focus on measurable outcomes rather than symbolic gestures. As the meeting concluded, Alexandra remained behind with Robert and Nicole to discuss a sensitive aspect of the initiative. We need to address the Elizabeth Whitfield situation. Nicole began referencing the wealthy passenger who had encouraged Victoria's behavior. Robert frowned. She has been a Platinum status member for 15 years, one of our highest revenue customers, who actively reinforced discriminatory behavior, Nicole pointed out. The flight records show she not only approved of Victoria's actions, but explicitly encouraged differential treatment. Alexandra considered this. What is the status of her upcoming bookings? Nicole consulted her tablet. 3 flights scheduled over the next 2 months. Paris, New York next week, then New York-London and London-New York in early June. Do not cancel them, Alexandra decided after a moment. But downgrade her loyalty status pending completion of our new passenger code of conduct training. Robert raised an eyebrow. You want to require a passenger to undergo training? I want to establish that holding Platinum status with Pinnacle means more than just flying frequently or paying for premium cabins, Alexandra clarified. It means upholding certain standards of behavior toward our staff and other passengers. She will push back, Robert warned. Possibly cancel her relationship with us entirely. That is her choice, Alexandra replied simply. But we cannot create a new culture while allowing the old behaviors to continue unchallenged, whether from our staff or our passengers. After Robert departed, Nicole remained to discuss a personnel matter that had been developing in parallel to the broader initiative. Thomas Wright accepted the training specialist position, she reported. He has already developed some impressive insights for the frontline implementation. I am not surprised. Alexandra smiled slightly. He demonstrated remarkable courage and clarity on that flight. Exactly the qualities we need leading this change. Nicole hesitated, then added, There has been some pushback from longer-tenured staff, comments suggesting he has only been promoted because he was nice to the CEO on the right day. Expected. Alexandra shrugged. Change is uncomfortable. Some people will look for any explanation that lets them dismiss it. Keep supporting him, but do not shield him entirely. He needs to develop the resilience to face that resistance directly. As Nicole departed, Alexandra turned to the window overlooking the Manhattan skyline. In the month since Flight 837, Pinnacle Airways had initiated more structural change than in the previous 3 years combined. The incident had been painful, public, and personally humiliating, but it had also created an opening for transformation that might otherwise have taken years to achieve. Sometimes, she reflected, the most powerful catalyst for change was seeing the problem too clearly to ignore it any longer. Her phone buzzed with a message from Thomas Wright. You should see this. Attached was a link to Miguel Rodriguez's latest video. The travel journalist had been following the Respect Initiative's implementation, closely providing regular updates to his now massive audience. This latest installment was titled 1 Month Later, How Pinnacle Airways is Actually Changing. Alexandra watched as Miguel documented the tangible changes already visible across Pinnacle's operation. More diverse flight crews, new training sessions in progress, the beta version of the feedback app being tested by passengers. He had interviewed frontline staff executives and travelers, creating a comprehensive picture of a company in transformation. What makes this different from typical corporate damage control, Miguel concluded in the video, is that Pinnacle is not just changing policies on paper. They are changing behaviors on planes, and they are inviting passengers to hold them accountable in real time. That is not PR spin. That is genuine commitment to improvement. Alexandra sent a brief reply to Thomas, progress, not perfection, but definitely progress. The real test would come in the months and years ahead as the immediate pressure of the public incident faded and the daily challenges of implementation remained. Sustaining change was always harder than initiating it, but watching the momentum building across the organization, Alexandra felt cautiously optimistic. Flight 837 had revealed the worst of Pinnacle's culture. Now they had the opportunity to build something better, not just for one CEO who happened to experience discrimination firsthand, but for every passenger who would board a Pinnacle aircraft in the future. 2 months after her termination, Victoria Winters sat in yet another coffee shop, scanning job listings on her laptop. The routine had become depressingly familiar. Wake up, apply for positions, receive rejections. Repeat. Her 22 years of experience at Pinnacle Airways, once her greatest professional asset, had become toxic by association. The airline industry was small and interconnected. While her name had not been widely published in the media industry, insiders knew exactly who had been terminated following the Alexandra Morgan incident. She had applied to 7 airlines, 4 hotel chains, 3 cruise lines, and countless customer service positions. The results were consistent, either immediate rejection or initial interest, followed by sudden disengagement after background checks. More coffee. The barista approached with a pot. Please. Victoria nodded, pushing her cup forward. This particular coffee shop had become her regular haunt, far enough from her apartment to avoid running into former colleagues, inexpensive enough to accommodate her rapidly dwindling savings. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. Another rejection, this time from a regional airline where she had applied for a ground operations position, several steps down from her former role, but at this point she would take anything. Thank you for your interest. Impressed with your experience. Unfortunately, not the right fit at this time. Victoria closed the email with a sigh. The carefully crafted language could not disguise the underlying message. You are untouchable. The bell above the door chimed as a new customer entered. Victoria glanced up reflexively, then quickly lowered her gaze. James Peterson, the business executive from Flight 837, was standing at the counter ordering coffee. She hunched over her laptop, hoping he would not notice her. But as he turned to wait for his order, his eyes swept the seating area and locked with hers. Recognition flashed across his face. Victoria braced herself for public humiliation for a loud declaration of her identity to the entire coffee shop. Instead, after a moment's hesitation, James picked up his coffee and walked directly to her table. Ms. Winters, he said quietly. Mr. Peterson. Her voice was barely audible. May I? He gestured to the empty chair opposite her. Victoria nodded stiffly, closing her laptop. What choice did she have? James sat studying her with unexpected thoughtfulness. I almost did not recognize you without the uniform. That is somewhat the point, Victoria admitted. I am not eager to be recognized these days. James nodded, understanding. I can imagine. They sat in awkward silence for a moment, 2 participants in a shared historical moment now unexpectedly reunited. Why did you do it? James finally asked, his tone more curious than accusatory. On the flight. You must have known it was wrong even before you discovered who she was. Victoria stared into her coffee. The question was one she had been asking herself for 2 months without reaching a satisfying answer. "I do not know," she finally said. "Not really. It just seemed normal. The way things were done, the way they had always been done." "But not with every passenger," James pressed gently. Victoria met his eyes. "No, not with every passenger." Another silence, heavier this time. "I am not a racist," Victoria said suddenly, the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. "I never thought of myself that way. I had ideas about who belonged in first class, what they should look like, how they should act, and Ms. Morgan did not fit that image. No, she did not." Victoria's voice dropped to a whisper. "And I never questioned why I had that image in the first place." James nodded slowly. "I have been thinking about that flight a lot, about why I did not say anything until it was too late, about what that says about me." Victoria looked up, surprised by the confession. "You were just a passenger." "Who saw something wrong and stayed silent," James countered. "That makes me part of the problem too, does not it?" The question hung between them, neither accusation nor absolution, simply an honest reckoning with uncomfortable truth. "What will you do now?" James asked after a moment. Victoria gestured to her laptop. "Try to find work, though at this point I would settle for any job that would have me." James considered this. "It will not be easy. The story is still making waves throughout the industry." "I know." Victoria's voice was resigned. 22 years building a career destroyed in a single day. Because of choices you made. James reminded her gently but firmly. Victoria did not argue the point. "Yes, because of choices I made." James finished his coffee and stood to leave. But instead of simply walking away, he pulled a business card from his wallet and placed it on the table. "Westridge Capital has a foundation that supports professional retraining programs," he said. "When you are ready to build something new, something better, give them a call. Mention my name." Victoria stared at the card. "Why would you help me?" James considered the question seriously. "Because I believe in second chances. But more importantly, because I believe that people who recognize their mistakes have something valuable to teach others about avoiding the same ones." He turned to leave, then paused. "The path forward is not going back to who you were, Ms. Winters. It is becoming someone different, someone better." As James departed, Victoria remained at the table, his business card sitting before her like a small, unexpected bridge to a possible future. Not forgiveness, she had not earned that yet. Not restoration, her former life was irrevocably gone. But perhaps eventually redemption. She picked up the card, turning it over in her fingers thoughtfully. Then she tucked it carefully into her wallet alongside the growing collection of rejection letters, a tiny fragile seed of possibility amid the wreckage of what had once been her life. That evening, Victoria did something she had avoided for 2 months. She opened her laptop and typed Alexandra Morgan Pinnacle Airways into the search bar. Dozens of articles appeared documenting not just the incident, but the subsequent transformation of the airline under Alexandra's leadership. Victoria read for hours, absorbing the details of the Respect Initiative, the structural changes to complaint, handling the expanded Protocol 16 program. She read comments from other Pinnacle employees, from industry analysts, from passengers experiencing the changes firsthand. And for the first time since her termination, she allowed herself to confront the full reality of what she had done and the positive changes that had paradoxically resulted from her terrible behavior. She had lost everything. But Pinnacle Airways was becoming better because of it. There was a certain bitter justice in that realization, a hard but necessary lesson in consequences and accountability. Victoria closed her laptop and walked to her window, gazing out at the New York skyline. Somewhere out there, Alexandra Morgan was leading the transformation of an airline that Victoria had once called home. And somewhere out there, perhaps, was Victoria's own path to becoming someone different, someone better. It would not be easy. It would not be quick. It might not even be possible. But for the first time in 2 months, Victoria Winters allowed herself to consider a future defined not by what she had lost, but by what she might yet become. Welcome to Pinnacle Airways Flight 921 to London. My name is Thomas Wright, and I will be your lead flight attendant today. Thomas moved through the first-class cabin with practiced ease, greeting each passenger with the same warm professionalism regardless of appearance, dress, or demeanor. 6 months into his role as a training specialist for the Respect Initiative, he still maintained his flight qualifications by serving as lead attendant on selected routes, a bridge between the corporate headquarters where policies were made and the aircraft cabins where they were implemented. Ms. Jackson, welcome aboard. Your pre-flight beverage will be served shortly. Mr. Rodriguez, good to see you again. How was your conference in Barcelona? Miguel Rodriguez smiled as he stowed his carry-on. Productive, and congratulations on the feature in Business Weekly. The CEO who flew coach to transform first class. Quite a headline. Thomas nodded. Ms. Morgan deserves the recognition. The changes she has implemented are making a real difference. Indeed, Alexandra Morgan had recently been featured on the cover of Business Weekly, the headline celebrating her hands-on approach to corporate transformation. The article had detailed the comprehensive changes at Pinnacle Airways following the infamous Flight 837 incident, highlighting the Respect Initiative as a model for the industry. The most visible change was the small golden pin now worn by every Pinnacle crew member, a circular emblem inscribed with the word respect, serving as both public commitment and daily reminder of the company's values. Less visible but more substantive were the structural changes the new complaint handling system that had already processed over 5,000 service reports, the real-time feedback app now used by thousands of passengers daily, the expanded training program that had reached 100% of customer-facing staff. The results were measurable. Customer satisfaction scores had increased across all demographic groups. More importantly, the gap between satisfaction scores from white passengers and passengers of color had narrowed significantly, not by reducing quality for some, but by improving it for all. Thomas? A voice interrupted his thoughts. Do you have a moment? Thomas turned to find James Peterson settling into his seat in row 3. Of course, Mr. Peterson. What can I do for you? James lowered his voice. I ran into Victoria Winters about 4 months ago. I have been wondering what became of her. Thomas hesitated. Victoria's name was rarely mentioned at Pinnacle these days, except as a case study in what not to do. I am not sure he admitted. I heard she was having difficulty finding work in the industry. James nodded thoughtfully. I gave her my foundation's contact information. I hope she used it. That was generous of you. Thomas observed, careful to maintain professional neutrality. Not generosity, James corrected. Accountability. We all played a role in what happened that day, even those of us who stayed silent when we should have spoken up. Before Thomas could respond, his attention was drawn to a new passenger boarding the first-class cabin, a distinguished older woman with silver hair and a designer handbag. Mrs. Whitfield, he greeted her. Welcome back to Pinnacle Airways. Elizabeth Whitfield nodded stiffly. Mr. Wright, I see you have been promoted since our last encounter. In a manner of speaking, Thomas acknowledged. Your seat is 4A today. May I help you with your coat? Elizabeth surrendered her cashmere coat with a bemused expression. Since the incident, she had been required to complete Pinnacle's new passenger code of conduct training to maintain her loyalty status, a requirement she had initially resisted fiercely before ultimately complying. I must admit, she said quietly as Thomas hung her coat. I did not expect these changes to last. Corporate initiatives usually fade once the media attention moves on. This one will not, Thomas assured her. Ms. Morgan is quite determined. Elizabeth settled into her seat, a thoughtful expression replacing her usual imperiousness. Yes, I believe she is. And perhaps that is for the best. As Thomas continued his pre-flight duties, his mind briefly returned to Victoria Winters. What would she make of the transformed airline that had once been her workplace? Would she recognize the positive changes that had ironically resulted from her terrible behavior? Or would she see only what she had lost? The questions had no answers, at least none that Thomas could provide. Victoria's story had become a footnote in Pinnacle's history, a catalyst for change, then left behind as the company moved forward. Meanwhile, in a classroom at the City College of New York, Victoria Winters stood before a whiteboard addressing a diverse group of adult students. Today, we are discussing customer service ethics. She began, her voice steady and assured. Specifically, how unconscious bias influences service quality and what we can do to recognize and counteract it. The career rehabilitation program had been unexpected, emerging from her connection with James Peterson's foundation and her growing willingness to share her story as a cautionary tale. She was not teaching flight attendants or airline staff that bridge was thoroughly burned. Instead, she was working with adult learners in a general business program, using her experience as a powerful example of what not to do. 6 months ago, I lost a 22-year career because of choices I made. Victoria told her students, her voice carrying no self-pity, only clarity. Choices rooted in assumptions and biases I had never examined. Today, I want to help you avoid making the same mistakes. It was not the future she had envisioned. It was not the culmination of her decades in the airline industry. But it was perhaps the beginning of something more meaningful, a way to transform her failure into lessons for others. Back at Pinnacle Airways headquarters, Alexandra Morgan reviewed the latest quarterly results with her executive team. The Respect Initiative metrics were displayed alongside traditional financial indicators, given equal prominence in the company's performance assessment. Service quality ratings are up 18% year over year, Carlos reported. More importantly, the disparity between demographic groups has decreased by 76% since implementation began. Complaint escalations, Alexandra asked. Initially increased as expected with the new system, Nicole explained, but now trending downward as frontline issues are addressed more effectively. Robert Grant, ever the financial pragmatist, added the business perspective. Customer loyalty has increased 12% among previously underserved demographics. That translates to approximately $42 million in retained revenue that we would have likely lost to competitors. Alexandra nodded, satisfied with the progress, but not complacent. Good. But we are not done. I want the remaining service disparities eliminated entirely by year-end, not eliminated. That is an ambitious target, Diana observed. Yes, Alexandra agreed without apology. It is, because mostly equal is not equal at all. As the meeting concluded, Alexandra remained behind to review the latest Protocol 16 reports. The program had expanded significantly, with executives from every level regularly experiencing Pinnacle's service as ordinary passengers. The data was encouraging. Incidents of discriminatory treatment had declined sharply. When they did occur, they were addressed immediately through the new accountability structures rather than buried in bureaucracy. Alexandra's phone chimed with a message from Thomas Wright. Flight 921 departed on time. Full implementation of respect protocols observed in first class and business, continuing to economy, will submit full report upon landing. She smiled slightly. Thomas had exceeded her expectations, emerging as one of the most effective advocates for the initiative. His experience on Flight 837 had given him unique credibility with both management and frontline staff, the rare ability to speak truthfully to both. Alexandra sent a brief reply. Noted. Thank you, Thomas. 6 months after the watershed moment on Flight 837 Pinnacle Airways was a demonstrably different company. The changes were not merely cosmetic or temporary. They were structural, measurable, and increasingly embedded in the organizational culture. There was still work to be done, still resistance to overcome, still habits to change. But the direction was clear, the commitment unwavering. What had begun as a painful public incident had evolved into a genuine transformation proof that even the most entrenched patterns could be changed with sufficient will focus and accountability. As she prepared for her next meeting, Alexandra reflected briefly on Victoria Winters. She had never spoken with Victoria directly either during the flight or afterward. There had been no dramatic confrontation, no opportunity for Victoria to apologize or for Alexandra to forgive. Perhaps that was fitting. This had never been about personal vindication or retribution. It had been about creating an airline where every passenger received the same high-quality service regardless of appearance, background, or title. An airline where future Alexandra Morgans would not need to be CEOs to be treated with basic dignity and respect. 1 year after Flight 837, Victoria Winters stood in the back of a crowded auditorium at a regional customer service conference. On stage, Carlos Mendoza from Pinnacle Airways was presenting the results of the Respect Initiative to an audience of industry professionals. "The data is clear," Carlos was saying, gesturing to the charts behind him. "Equitable service is not just ethically right, it is a business imperative. We have seen double-digit improvements in customer loyalty, employee satisfaction, and brand perception." Victoria watched silently, a name badge identifying her as a representative of the Urban Education Center rather than an airline. She had debated whether to attend this conference, knowing that Pinnacle executives would be presenting and former colleagues might be present. But her new role teaching service ethics required her to stay current with industry developments, and Pinnacle's transformation had become a case study taught in business schools nationwide. Carlos continued his presentation detailing the specific changes Pinnacle had implemented and the measurable results they had achieved. Victoria listened with the strange dual perspective of both outsider and insider. No longer part of the company, yet intimately familiar with the culture he was describing. When the presentation ended and the audience dispersed for the networking break, Victoria remained in her seat, processing what she had heard. Pinnacle had changed profoundly in her absence, becoming a leader in equitable service practices across the industry. The airline she had served for 22 years had been transformed paradoxically because of her failure. Victoria. She looked up to see Thomas Wright standing in the aisle beside her. Her former junior colleague, now wearing a Pinnacle executive badge, was regarding her with surprise and uncertainty. Thomas, she acknowledged, rising to her feet. "That was an excellent presentation. Thank you," he replied, studying her carefully. "I did not expect to see you here." Victoria gestured to her name badge. "I teach service ethics now. Part of the job is staying informed on industry developments." Thomas nodded, absorbing this information. "I have heard you are doing good work. James Peterson mentioned it when he flew with us a few months ago. James has been unexpectedly supportive," Victoria admitted, "when most people wanted nothing to do with me." An awkward silence fell between them. Former colleagues separated by a chasm of experience and consequence. "How is everything?" at Pinnacle, Victoria finally asked. "Changed," Thomas replied simply. "For the better, I think. The Respect Initiative has transformed not just policies but culture. Things that used to be accepted are now addressed immediately. Things that used to be ignored are now measured and managed." Victoria nodded, a complex mixture of emotions crossing her features. "Good. That is, good." "It is," Thomas agreed. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he added, "You know, in a strange way, you helped make it happen. Not intentionally, of course, but my failure created an opening for change." Victoria finished for him. I have had a lot of time to think about that particular irony. They stood in silence again, the busy conference hall flowing around them like a river around two stones. "Are you happy?" Thomas Victoria asked suddenly. With your new role with the changes, Thomas considered the question seriously. "Yes. I am doing meaningful work that aligns with my values. That matters more than I understood a year ago." Victoria smiled faintly. "I am learning that lesson too, belatedly. My new role pays less than half what I made at Pinnacle, but the work feels necessary, important. Teaching others to avoid your mistakes." "Exactly." Victoria's expression was rueful but determined. "It is not the future I planned, but perhaps it is the one I needed." Before Thomas could respond, a voice called his name from across the hall. Carlos was gesturing for him to join a group of industry executives. "I should go," Thomas said apologetically. "Of course." Victoria stepped back, preparing to retreat into anonymity again. But Thomas did not immediately walk away. Instead, he regarded her thoughtfully for a moment. "Victoria," he said quietly, "what happened on Flight 837 was wrong. What you did was wrong. But what you are doing now, using that experience to teach others to prevent similar incidents, that is right. That matters." The words were not forgiveness exactly. They were not absolution or reconciliation, but they were acknowledgement of her effort to create something meaningful from her failure. And in that moment, it was enough. "Thank you, Thomas," she replied simply. He nodded once, then turned and walked toward Carlos and the waiting executives. Victoria remained for a moment watching as Thomas was welcomed into the group, respected, valued, advancing in a career that she had once thought would be hers. Then she gathered her conference materials and made her way toward the exit alone, but not entirely bereft. Outside the convention center, Victoria paused on the steps looking up at the clear blue sky. A Pinnacle Airways plane passed overhead, its logo visible even from the ground. She watched it until it disappeared from view, a symbol of both what she had lost and what she was struggling to become. The path forward was not easy. It was not the path she would have chosen, but she was beginning to understand a path with its own purpose and meaning, one that might eventually lead to a kind of redemption she had not initially believed possible. Victoria descended the steps and began walking toward the subway, her conference badge swinging slightly with each step. Behind her, the aviation industry continued evolving partially because of mistakes she had made and lessons painfully learned. Ahead of her lay a future still uncertain but no longer empty, a future where her worst failure might become her most valuable teaching tool. It was not the ending she had once envisioned for her story. But perhaps, she reflected as she joined the flow of commuters descending into the subway, it was a better beginning than she deserved. 3 years had passed since Flight 837. The incident, once headline news, had gradually been absorbed into corporate folklore, a watershed moment frequently referenced in business school case studies, but fading from public consciousness as new controversies emerged to capture the world's attention. Victoria Winters stood at the podium in a community center classroom concluding her workshop on recognizing bias in customer service. The attendees, a diverse group of adult learners preparing to enter or return to the workforce, were gathering their materials and exchanging contact information. "Remember," Victoria emphasized as the session wound down, "the most dangerous biases are the ones we do not recognize in ourselves. Questioning our own assumptions is not weakness. It is the foundation of truly equitable service." As the participants filed out, Victoria began gathering her presentation materials. The community center's director had poked her head in earlier to mention that a special guest would be observing the next session, someone from a corporate foundation considering funding for the program's expansion. Victoria straightened the classroom, arranging chairs in a semicircle for the afternoon workshop. 3 years of teaching had given her a different perspective on space, no longer the hierarchical environment of an aircraft cabin, but the collaborative circle of a learning community. She checked her watch. 15 minutes until the next session. Just enough time to review her notes and prepare for the observer. Victoria had grown accustomed to Foundation representatives and potential funders sitting in on her workshops. Their presence no longer made her nervous. The door opened behind her. Victoria turned, expecting the center director with the promised visitor. Instead, Alexandra Morgan stood in the doorway. Victoria froze recognition and shock, rendering her momentarily speechless. Alexandra looked much as she had 3 years earlier, composed, elegant, in a simple navy suit, her expression calm but alert. The only visible difference was a touch of gray at her temples that had not been there before. "Ms. Winters." Alexandra acknowledged with a slight nod. Ms. Morgan Victoria managed her voice steadier than she would have expected. "I was not told you would be the observer. I asked the director not to specify," Alexandra explained, stepping into the room. "I thought it might be easier that way." Victoria gathered herself, professional instincts taking over. "Would you like to sit? The next workshop begins in about 10 minutes. Alexandra took a seat in the semicircle, setting her briefcase beside her. Victoria remained standing, unsure of the appropriate protocol for this utterly unexpected reunion. "You are probably wondering why I am here," Alexandra said after a moment. "The thought had crossed my mind," Victoria admitted. "I cannot imagine Pinnacle Airways is considering funding this program." "Not Pinnacle directly, no," Alexandra clarified. "The Morgan Foundation, my personal foundation, is evaluating community education initiatives focused on bias recognition and equitable service practices. Your program was recommended by James Peterson." Victoria absorbed this information. "I see. James speaks highly of the work you are doing here," Alexandra continued. "He believes it is making a genuine difference." "I try," Victoria said simply. They regarded each other in silence for a moment. Two women whose lives had intersected in a single dramatic incident and then diverged into entirely different trajectories. "I owe you an apology," Victoria finally said, the word she had rehearsed countless times in her mind over 3 years finally finding voice. "What I did on that flight was inexcusable, discriminatory, wrong. I have spent 3 years trying to understand why I acted that way and trying to become someone different." Alexandra listened without interruption, her expression attentive but unreadable. "I do not expect forgiveness," Victoria continued. "I do not even expect you to believe that I have changed. But I want you to know that what happened that day, what I did, led me to completely reevaluate who I was and who I wanted to be." She gestured to the classroom around them. "This work teaching others to recognize their biases before they act on them has become my way of trying to create something positive from my failure. It does not erase what I did. Nothing could. But it might help prevent others from making the same mistakes." Alexandra was quiet for a moment, considering Victoria's words. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured and thoughtful. "You know, I never intended to reveal my identity on that flight," she said. "I wanted to experience our service as any passenger would. What happened forced my hand, but it also revealed problems that might have remained hidden much longer otherwise." She studied Victoria with a gaze that was neither accusatory nor forgiving, simply clear-sighted. "Pinnacle Airways is a better company today because of what happened 3 years ago. More equitable, more accountable, more true to the values we claimed to hold." Victoria nodded, acknowledging the truth in this assessment. "I lost my career," she said quietly. "But thousands of passengers gained something more important, the right to be treated with equal respect regardless of how they look." "Yes," Alexandra agreed. "That is an accurate summary of the situation." Another silence fell between them. Not comfortable, but no longer as tense as before. "May I observe your workshop?" Alexandra asked, returning to the ostensible purpose of her visit. "Of course," Victoria replied. "Though I should warn you that I use Flight 837 as a case study, I do not mention names, but the participants might recognize the incident Alexandra finished for her. That is fine. It is public record, and perhaps hearing it from your perspective will be instructive. Before Victoria could respond, the door opened again as participants for the afternoon session began to arrive. They filled the remaining seats in the semicircle, some casting curious glances at Alexandra, though none appeared to recognize her. Victoria returned to the podium and began the workshop with practiced ease, introducing concepts of unconscious bias and its impact on service quality. As the session progressed, she moved into practical examples, eventually arriving at what she called the flight incident. 3 years ago, I was a senior flight attendant with over 20 years of experience, Victoria explained to the group. I considered myself professional, fair, and unbiased. And then, on one particular flight, I discriminated against a passenger because she did not fit my image of who belonged in first class. She detailed the incident without excuses or self-justification, describing each discriminatory action she had taken and the assumptions that had driven them. Throughout, Alexandra remained silent, watching Victoria transform their shared history into a powerful teaching moment. I did not recognize my bias, Victoria concluded. I did not question my assumptions. And because of that, I caused harm, lost my career, and failed the basic ethical requirements of my profession. The passenger I mistreated turned out to be the CEO of the airline, but that is actually the least important detail of the story. She looked around the room, making eye contact with each participant. She should not have needed to be CEO to receive equal respectful service. No one should. That is the real lesson here. As the workshop continued with group exercises and discussion, Alexandra observed Victoria's teaching style, direct, thoughtful, and notably free from self-pity. She had taken full ownership of her failure and transformed it into a tool for others' learning. When the session concluded 2 hours later, the participants departed with new perspectives and practical strategies. Victoria remained at the podium gathering her materials as Alexandra approached. "That was illuminating," Alexandra said. "You have developed an effective teaching methodology." "Thank you," Victoria replied. "It has evolved over time. I have found that personal failure makes a more powerful example than theoretical concepts." Alexandra nodded in agreement. "The Morgan Foundation will be supporting your program's expansion. The director will receive official notification next week." Victoria looked up, genuinely surprised. "I appreciate that. The program has a waiting list we have not been able to accommodate due to funding constraints." "I believe in the work you are doing," Alexandra said simply. "Not because it absolves past actions, but because it helps prevent future ones." Victoria accepted this assessment with a nod. "That is all I am trying to accomplish at this point." As Alexandra prepared to leave, she paused, considering her next words carefully. "You asked me once in this very discussion if I believed you had changed. I did not answer then, but I will now. Yes, I believe you have. The woman who taught that workshop today is not the same woman who discriminated against me 3 years ago." Victoria swallowed hard, unprepared for the emotional impact of this recognition. "Thank you for saying that. It means a great deal coming from you." "The true measure of change is not in policies or programs," Alexandra observed. "It is in people. And sometimes the people who need to change the most are the ones who can eventually help others change too." Victoria nodded, absorbing the profound truth of this observation. "I lost everything because of who I was," she acknowledged. "But I found something better because of who I am becoming." Alexandra extended her hand, offering not forgiveness exactly, but a certain professional recognition of Victoria's journey. Victoria accepted it. The handshake brief, but significant, a small moment of human connection, bridging the chasm their shared history had created. As Alexandra departed, Victoria remained in the classroom, reflecting on the unexpected closure this encounter had provided. The weight of the past had not disappeared entirely. It never would. but it felt somehow lighter now, more like a lesson carried forward than a burden dragging her back. Outside the community center, Alexandra paused on the sidewalk, looking up at the building where Victoria Winters was transforming her greatest failure into a force for positive change. The symmetry was powerful, both women now dedicated to ensuring that what happened on Flight 837 would never happen again, approaching the same goal from completely different positions. Alexandra's phone buzzed with a message from Thomas Wright, now Vice President of Service Quality at Pinnacle Airways Respect Initiative. Third-year results finalized. 0 statistical difference in service quality across passenger demographics. We did it. Alexandra smiled slightly as she typed her response. Not the end, just the beginning. Keep going. She tucked her phone away and continued down the sidewalk toward her waiting car, the path ahead clear and purposeful. Behind her, in a community center classroom, Victoria prepared for her next workshop, her path different but equally meaningful. Justice, Alexandra reflected, was not about punishment. It was about transformation. Of systems, yes, but more importantly, of hearts and minds. The story of Flight 837 had come full circle. The incident on Pinnacle Airways Flight 837 forever changed the lives of everyone involved. What began as a routine journey across the Atlantic became a powerful catalyst for transformation, not just for an airline, but for an industry and the individuals caught in its pivotal moment. Alexandra Morgan continued leading Pinnacle Airways with a renewed commitment to equitable service, her experience on Flight 837 informing every major decision. The Respect Initiative became an industry standard, with multiple airlines adopting similar programs and metrics. Her quiet dignity in the face of discrimination had ultimately created more positive change than any amount of outrage or retaliation could have achieved. Victoria Winters never returned to the airline industry but found unexpected purpose in teaching others to recognize the biases she had once embodied. Her greatest failure became her most powerful teaching tool, and in that transformation lay a form of redemption few would have predicted possible in the aftermath of her very public disgrace. If this story resonates with you, perhaps it is because we have all been on both sides of the equation at different moments, making assumptions about others based on appearance or being judged unfairly without consideration of our full humanity. The true power of this story is not in its dramatic revelation or satisfying consequences, but in its reminder that real dignity comes not from titles or positions, but from how we treat each person we encounter, regardless of who we believe them to be. Where are you watching from? Have you witnessed or experienced discrimination in spaces where you should have been welcomed? Share your story below. And remember, change begins not with grand gestures, but with simple, consistent choices to see beyond our assumptions and treat every person with the dignity they inherently deserve. This story isn't just about what happened in first class. It's about what happens in all of us when we allow our biases to dictate our actions. If you found value in this message, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us create more content that sparks meaningful conversations about equality, dignity, and the power of positive change. Let's continue this important discussion in the comments below. We're reading every one of your stories and experiences. Together we can build a world where respect isn't just an initiative but a way of life.